Listen-only mode.
No, maybe not. Maybe for now.
Hello all, and welcome to today's webinar. My name is Eric Bloom, and our webinar is 10 Great Negotiation Tips for IT Managers. First, what I'd like to do is I'd like to thank New Horizons, who is the sponsor and coordinator for today's webinar. Thank you to all. Here we go. I'd like to begin with just sort of the one slide, shameless plug, is that this webinar is brought to you as a combination of New Horizons and our firm Manager Mechanics. We're a business partner of New Horizons. And would just like to tell you of some upcoming classes. The next free webinar, which is basically we do a monthly installment of this. This one obviously is 10 Great Negotiation Tips. Next month is maximizing your IT management bench strength. In addition to that, Manager Mechanics is the governing body for 2 certifications in IT management, the IT MLP and the IT MLE. IT in both cases stands for, well, as you would expect, information technology. The MLP means Management and Leadership Professional, and the E is Management and Leadership Executive, which is a slightly more senior level certification. Here are the 2 certification boot camps that will give you the preparation needed to pass the appropriate exam. In fact, just while on this slide, let me just say that in fact today's topic, regarding negotiation, actually a greatly expanded version of this is contained within the MLE. Now, I'm your speaker. My name is Eric Bloom. I'm the founder and president of Manager Mechanics. I've been in IT for, well, longer than I care to admit. I'll just say 25 years plus. I'm actually the initial creator of the certification. I'm also the author of 3 books, first of which is, well, some from years ago, but they're only marginally coherent, and I wouldn't suggest them. But anyway, in recent years, I've done 3 books. The first, Manager Mechanics, Tips and Advice for First-Time Managers, which in fact the company was named after the book. And as an interesting just note is people would say, gee, you were really lucky that your book was named Manager Mechanics, and that website URL was open for you. And I said, no, and anyone who's tried to find URLs, you probably already know what I'm going to say. But I, in fact, found an open URL, named the book after the URL, and then eventually named the company after the book. Anyway, in more recent years, or very recently actually, both coming out within the last month or 2, 2 other books, Your IT Career, Get Noticed, Get Promoted, and Build Your Professional Brand, and The CIO's Guide to Staff Needs Growth and Productivity. I'm also actually on the board of the National Speakers Association, and where the content for the above books came from is I'm a nationally syndicated columnist with Gatehouse Media, and I'm in itworld.com, the online magazine. I'm on their homepage with a column called Your IT Career. And for what it's worth, I'm also a certified coach. But anyway, enough of all that. Let's get into the material at hand. I'd like to begin talking about negotiation by specifically addressing sort of the white elephant in the room. You know, originally, it's funny, on this slide when we put it together, we originally had a picture of a white elephant, but the problem was you couldn't really see it on the white background. So anyway, we went with a regular elephant. But anyway, the elephant in the room about negotiation and negotiation classes is there are people that, quite frankly, just hate to negotiate. Now, that usually comes forward for a number of reasons. And by the way, if you do like to negotiate, that's awesome. You'll now see sort of how the other half lives. If you don't like to negotiate, take this to heart because it's very, very important. What happens is that if you hate to negotiate and as a result don't, you can hate it and still do it. But if you hate it and don't negotiate well, it really puts you at a disadvantage from a number of different perspectives. But usually if people hate to negotiate, it's for one of these 5 reasons. It's a lack of confidence. You know, I might as well not try to negotiate it because I'm never going to get what I want. I actually had a little whine in my voice there. I apologize for that. Next is lack of experience. You know, you don't usually negotiate things, so as a result, it's intimidating. You know, think of anything that you have to go in and perform on that you're not properly experienced to do. Next is you might dislike confrontation. In other words, people think, and we'll see a slide coming up on it, but they think of negotiation as confrontation. You know, it's like me against you, where are the boxing gloves? And in fact, that's not the case. The next is poor decision-making abilities. You know, if there's one thing you need to do when you're negotiating is you have to make decisions. Do I like this deal? Do I not like it? Do I want to? I often use car examples because everyone's sort of the poster child for negotiation for both its good points and bad points is buying a car. But you know, it's if you have poor decision-making abilities, it's, is this a good price? Should I buy the car for this? Should I get it in blue or red? Gee, you know, we're negotiating off of getting the getting the leather seats, for example. You know, is that worth the extra $500 to me, or whatever it is? So as a result, you have to be able to make decisions to effectively negotiate. And last of which is a lack of assertiveness. And where this one comes out is assertiveness. You know, to look at it from this perspective. The perspective of assertiveness, among other things, is you having the willingness and the ability to tell other people what you want and what you're thinking. Well, in negotiation, you really have to be effective at it. You really have to be able to tell people what it is that you want. Now, one huge advantage of negotiation skills and negotiation training, is it's one of those few skills that you learn at the workplace that you can also use on the home front. You know, it's a great benefit in that regard. I mean, many of the things I have to admit that I've learned at work, you know, cost center management, hiring employees, you know, a lot of that stuff certainly has, you know, minor applicability to home, but negotiation, you know what? People are people, and every one of these skills that you're using is applicable both at home and at the office. I will just say, be careful which of these techniques, you know, you decide to use on your spouse. Your children, you can get a little more away from it, but I don't want to get anyone in trouble. Specifically, since Valentine's Day is in about a week and a half or so. You know, a week. What day is today? Today is Tuesday, so it's a week from Thursday, I think, is Valentine's Day. Anyway, is that it's how many people? I don't do polling on this, but I'm thinking that, well, I'm a guy, so I can say this. Maybe a bunch of guys said, "Wow, I'm glad he said that because Valentine's Day is like a week away. I better be a little proactive." But anyway, is that on the home front, you negotiate with your spouse on various things. On your kids, gee, I don't want to wear my jacket outside. Well, I think you should. Or, you know, things that you would want to sort of negotiate rather than just say, I'm the parent and I said so. Certainly with service providers, they're putting cable in on your street and you want to get a better price, or you don't like the way your minutes were charged over on your cell phone or whatnot. And you negotiate with friends. On the workplace, it's with customers and vendors, with clients, and as well as with your fellow employees, and with your fellow employees either that are peers, with your boss, or those who report to you. Now, the goal of this webinar is not to say to everyone on the line here is, gee, you know what? I want you to negotiate like I negotiate. No, that's not the case at all. The goal here is that for you to take the information that you're going to be learning here, or, you know, in time through larger negotiation classes that you take. But the trick is for you to find a style that works specifically for you. Because, you know, people are different. There are people who, you know, really like to be upfront and in your face. There are people who like to be more laid back. There are, you know, and everywhere in between. So as there are different types of people, there are different types of styles. Now, we can't get too much into the depth. There's just not enough time to get too much into the depth of negotiation styles. But at the end of the day here, what you want to do is you want to negotiate in a way that not only works for you, but you feel comfortable with. And I'll give you an example in a future slide of actually a style that I use to negotiate. Next. I'm not going to read this whole slide to you, but, you know, basically is that the idea is this is, if you go to dictionary.com, these are the 3 definitions that you're going to see for negotiation. Now, notice the only thing important to notice in here, and it's noted down at the bottom, is that the word conflict is never in these. You know, is that when you negotiate, is there conflict? Well, you know, in a manner of speaking, let's say that, well, actually, I should also thank Alex, by the way, who is from New Horizons and is helping to produce this webinar. You know, Alex and I are friends. Let's say that we decide to get together for lunch. And I say, hey, Alex, let's go out to lunch. And I tell him I want chicken. He says he wants fish. You know, is that a conflict? Well, a little bit. Why? Well, I want chicken, he wants fish. You know, but is it conflict? I would think not. You know, so most of the time when negotiation is being done, it's people are going to want to get to yes. If we want to get to go to lunch somewhere, maybe we'll find somewhere that has both chicken and fish. Well, you know what? That's it's a non-conflict based discussion, and it's a win-win, which is another concept we'll be speaking of soon. Right here. Now, when you talk about negotiation, there's basically three ways to look at the outcome of the negotiation. And by the way, as we look at these, where these are, the win-win, lose-win, and win-lose, are basically in your head. It's how did you feel about the end of it? Did you get enough out of this from your perspective? You know, like for example, and I'm going to go back to the car example, is that let's say that you want to buy a car and it's out there for $10,000. And, you know, you negotiate back and forth, and you say, well, I'm not going to pay 10, I'll give you 7 for it, blah, blah, blah. You know, you go back and forth a little bit, and you decide to buy it for, say, $8,000. Now, from your perspective, would have you liked to pay 7? Yeah, sure. But getting it for 8, do you feel good with that? If you say, yeah, you know what, 8 is a fair price for it. Sure, I would have liked to talk them down a little bit more. But, you know, I feel good at 8,000. So for you, that's a win. Now, let's say for the person you were buying the car from, they would have loved to sell it for you for 10. But, you know, the fact that you bought it for 8, they say, well, you know what, that was okay. You know, I would have liked to get maybe 8,500 or 9,000, but that feels good to me. That's a win-win because the mental attitude of both people at the end of the negotiation is they're satisfied with the outcome. Win-lose is where you basically, you know, just took huge advantage of the other person and got basically everything you wanted, or reasonably so. So where it's you're walking away saying, yeah, wow, I did great in that one, and the other person's walking away like, oh my God, I can't believe how that negotiation went. And lose-win is the opposite of that, where the other person's walking away doing a dance, and you're sitting there just feeling like you were, you know, beat up and, you know, and hung out to dry. Now, a couple of things I'd like to say on this. The first of which is on win-lose. What happens is that if you take a stance of win-lose, in other words, you're just going to push and push and push to get everything you can out of this person you're negotiating with. What happens is you may win the battle, you may get what you want, but understand that you do so at the peril of the relationship. Because think about it from your perspective. Say that I was negotiating with you on whatever it is. And I'm real, you know, at the end of it, you know, I get everything I want. Why? Because I basically, you know, beat you, you know, conceptually beat you to a pulp. I got everything I wanted. I used, you know, dirty negotiation tricks, and I got everything I wanted out of that negotiation. Well, what have I done? Yeah, you know, I might have done pretty well out of the negotiation, but you ever going to want to do business with me again? Probably not. So if I have any interest or any want at any future time to do business with you in the future, then if I push that negotiation too hard, then it can be big trouble. It just ends it. I'm going to give you an example of this, is that I've been both, as you saw from my bio, I've been a CIO. I've also been on the vendor side. Quite frankly, I'm on the vendor side now with my company, Manager Mechanics. To my CIO friends, they refer to it as I've gone over to the dark side. But anyway, is that there are times when vendors will come back to the company and say, you know what, I just don't want your money. You're pushing me too hard from a cost perspective. You're basically sucking all the profitability out of this engagement for us. I'm going to make the decision that I no longer want you as a client. Now, the company may say, oh, gee, you know, they really like working with you, but they've pushed you so hard and negotiated so tough that at some point you're just going to say, you know what, it's just not worthwhile. So that's the danger of really pushing to have a win-lose. Now, the bottom statement here is enormously important. And what it says is, like sports, and as I say that, let me apologize to anyone that's from San Francisco. I'm from Boston, so, you know, well, we never got there, and it was sort of hard for me to watch the game the other day. But anyway, congratulations to anyone from Baltimore. You guys beat us, and you beat San Francisco. You just did a good job. But anyway, is like sports, you can't win them all. But with the proper training, the proper preparation, and a proper amount of practice, then you can win. Then you can increase your winning percentage. Now, I mentioned earlier we weren't going to be talking too much about style and types of negotiating, but I just want to talk about these two here. Because you can cut things a million different ways. Here basically we're saying that all type negotiation is either competitive or cooperative. An old joke that goes along with that is, do you know that there are 3 types of people in the world? Those who are good in math and those who aren't. I'll just let that sink in for a sec. You gotta have a little bit of fun, right? But anyway, these are 2 specific types of negotiation: competitive and cooperative. What competitive negotiation is basically you're looking at this like sport. In other words, you're going in there for the for the win-lose. You want to go in there, you want to get as much out of this. If you're negotiating 10 items, you'll be maybe satisfied at 9 out of 10, but you're pushing for 10 out of 10. You want everything there is, okay? Cooperative negotiation is where you're really looking for a win-win. With cooperative, what happens is that let's back to the car thing, is that if I wanted to buy it for 7, he was selling it for 10. I'm willing to come up a little bit if he or she is willing to come down a little bit. For whatever the things being discussed are. I'm willing to be cooperative, give a little to take a little. Say, hey, I know this is important to you. That's all right, but this is important to me. Well, what happens is that's my style. I am, generally speaking, a cooperative negotiator. In fact, most people who do business with me once do business with me twice because I push for a win-win. Now, what happens is that I have to be very careful, because the reason I use the cooperative negotiation is because that's my personality. I don't really like to be in people's face and just really sort of slam things down people's throats. It's just not who I am as a person. I'm not saying one is right or wrong. I'm just saying that one is me and one isn't me. And by the way, I know negotiators in various styles who are all enormously successful because they found that thing that works for them. But what I have to be really careful of is if I'm since I know that by my nature I'm a cooperative negotiator, if I'm negotiating with someone who's a competitive negotiator, they're more than willing to compromise with me as much as I want to compromise. But the thing is, they're not going to compromise. So it's that, that old thing about the frog that keeps jumping halfway to the wall. What happens is that person is more than willing to let me give up as much as I want in the negotiation. So what happens is if I say, all right, well, I'll come up 500 if you'll come down 500, and the answer is, oh, all right, you're going to come up 500? That's great. Why don't we now start from there? So what I see is that I'm not negotiating with someone who's being cooperative back to me, that's doing this give and take thing. What they're doing is they're very good at the take, just not very good at the give. What happens is that I'll dig my heels in, and I'll say, all right, you want to, I won't say out loud, but I effectively will say, okay, I was being a cooperative negotiator. I see that you're being a competitive negotiator. Therefore, you know what? I'm not going to be cooperative anymore. I'm going to dig in my heels and act like you. And so what happens is because obviously I teach negotiation, but also is, I recognize what my style is and what the disadvantages are of my particular style. So if I know and pay attention to what the other person is doing, then I through training and practice will then change my style. Can I negotiate very competitively and be a really hard-nosed negotiator? Yes. Do I like it? No. Does it suck the energy out of me? I mean, I go home, I want to take a shower, because it's just not me. There's other people, again, I'm not making a value judgment of which is better. I'm just saying that this is me. And back to that other slide. So what I want you to do is come up with sort of a way you feel comfortable with, but understand where it works and when it doesn't work, and be willing to modify your style. Now let's get into our 10 tips. Tip number 1, understand the difference between distributive and integrative negotiation. I think that about says it on that slide. No, I'm just kidding. I got to tell you what they are. Distributive negotiation is basically where there's a certain, they refer to it as the size of the pie. So what I'll say is that if, let's say that you and I report to the same manager, and our manager comes to us and says, hey, we have $20,000 in training budget this year. Figure out between the two of you how you're going to divide it. So, you know, classically you'd say, all right, there's $20,000 there, which means if I get 10, you get 10. If I get 15, you get 5. That's distributed, where the size of the pie is defined, and you're basically fighting or negotiating over who gets how much of that pie. Integrative can be best viewed as being more of a strategic relationship or a partnership. The example I love to use here, because it's my favorite candy, is Reese's Peanut Butter Cups. So what happens is you can imagine two companies. One of the companies is a chocolate producer, and the other one is a peanut butter manufacturer. So what happens is neither one can produce Reese's Peanut Butter Cups alone, because they don't have both pieces of the product. So what they do is they're negotiating, it's who gets how much, but the idea is with this strategic alliance is that the whole is bigger than the sum of the parts. So now the moral of the story here regarding this is that, or let me go back to the other example now. I'm getting ahead of myself, I apologize. The moral of the story here is that what you want to do is in every distributive negotiation you have, like I talked about the trainers, the $10,000 for each of you, or however me and that other manager is going to split up that 20K. What we want to do, and this is the tip, we want to look for ways of turning distributive negotiations into integrative negotiations. I'm going to give you an example of this. Is back to our training example, where, all right, if I get 10, you get 10. If I get 15, you get 5. How about the two of us sit down and say, hey, you know what? I need a Java, a trainer to teach my group Java, and you need a trainer to teach your group Java. How about instead of splitting it up 10 and 10, what we do is we take $2,000 off the top, and we bring in a trainer to do a class on Java, and then we split up what's left. The reason is because if we each just got our 10, I'm going to spend 2 on Java, and you're going to spend 2 on Java. If we pool our resources and bring in one Java trainer for $2,000, then you know what? We're only spending $1,000 apiece. All of a sudden now we're getting into teamwork here, and that distributed, that fixed length pie is growing and growing. Other things you can do with that. Maybe one will say, hey, you know what? I need to teach someone in my shop how to do Lean Six Sigma, and you need to teach someone in your shop how to do .NET. How about this? My group teaches .NET. I have someone who'll teach it to you. You have a Lean Six Sigma green belt. Send them my way and teach us how to do that. So then what happens is that won't even count toward our training dollars. So the better the better job you can do of looking for integrative components within a distributive, a distributive negotiation, it allows you to somewhat artificially expand the pie where both people get more than if they didn't cooperate. Tip number 2, value of flexibility. All right, let's say that you're negotiating with a vendor. I'm going to give the example first. You're negotiating with a vendor, and you know what? You just want to get a little more out of this deal, but you're flexible. There's 3 things that you would like to get. You're almost at the end of the negotiation. You just want that little bit more to feel it's successful for you. You think you can push the salesperson a little bit farther, but still make them happy because you want to keep it win-win. But what it is that to the vendors, you'd say, you're thinking, you know what? Instead of having a 24-hour service level agreement, SLA, for response to certain issues, I'd really like to get it maybe down to 8 hours. Another thing I'd really like is that they offer 6 modules in their cloud-based product, or purchased software or hardware, whatever, is, you know what, they gave me 4 of the software modules. I'd really like to get the 5th one. I'm wondering if he'd throw it in. And then you say to yourself, gee, you know what? It's going to be hard to implement this software, so I'd be happy if I could just negotiate in a little additional, free consulting time. So you in your own mind, and of course you would know about this ahead of time, we're going to talk about preparation, would say, all right, you feel equally good about those, the SLA, the free software module, or the additional consulting. So what you do is you try to analyze the vendor, the software company, and say, gee, you know what? I know I'm really only going to get extra on one of these three. Which one of these do I think they're most willing to give up? So let's look at the three of them. All right, is that the SLA? All right, well, they may be more willing to give that up because they know that their software runs pretty well. So then you're not going to need them that often. The second one is you're thinking, oh, an additional module. Well, they may actually like that. They'll give you the module for 50 grand because then you're going to have to pay maintenance on it. So asking for that 50 grand for free, they may figure in the long term they're making a little extra cash on you. Or third, you say, oh, I don't know about the extra consulting time. That's, physical boots on, at location kind of thing. So that's actual cash out of pocket. So, you're assessing the vendor to say, which one of these three do you think you can get? And if you can hit it right, if you can figure that out either through discussion or just by knowing their business model, you can probably get maybe 2 modules for free for 100 grand. Whereas you only may have been able to negotiate an extra 5 or 10 grand of extra consulting time. So the moral of the story here, and brings to the sort of the text on the slide, the more flexible you are with the potential outcomes of the negotiation, the better you can maximize your outcome. The more you can sort of win and get out of this, without making the other guy feel bad, because they were willing to give up that piece a little bit anyway. Tip number 3, power of the parking lot. Now, for this one, I'd like to begin by saying, before I really explain it, is not only is this good in negotiations, but it's also really, really good in business meetings. And I'm going to explain this one first. Have you ever been in a meeting where you had 4 or 5 agenda items for a 1-hour meeting? And you're like 40 minutes, 45 minutes into the meeting, and people are still arguing about the first agenda item? I don't know about you, but I can, think of a number of occasions where that's happened to me. And there are tips, actually, on how to run meetings so that doesn't happen or is less likely to. In fact, actually, that's in our MLP. That's in our MLP certification, how to do that. But anyway, is that this works really well in meetings as well as in negotiation. And what it is if you get to a sticking point. In other words, I'm saying that I want the car to be blue. You're saying, no, if you buy this car, I'm only going to give it to you in red. That is a negotiation point that you're stuck on. Or, what's going to be the billing rate or things along that line. So what you do is you basically take you make a short-term agreement to agree to disagree on this particular item. Excuse me. And what you do is you put it in the parking lot. What the parking lot is, it's basically, on the whiteboard or on a flip chart or on the piece of paper, that the two of you can both see that says, all right, the billing rate, we'll come back to that one next. Come back to that one at the end. We're sort of at a sticking point. Let's try to go through some of the other items. Let's just put it on the shelf or put it in the parking lot and come back to it later. That has some major advantages for you as a negotiator. One of which is that it stops an impasse. In other words, you're going to be able to move on. You'll have to come back to it, but you can move on from it. Second of all, you've just come to an agreement. You've agreed, you and them, you've agreed to deal with it later. And what happens is one of the advantages of putting things, or another advantage of putting something in the parking lot, is that over time, let's say that there were 5 things that you were discussing. That was the first one. You put it in the parking lot. You couldn't get anywhere with it. And then the next 4, you sort of do pretty well. You start building a rapport. You start gaining a little bit of trust. You start getting momentum. The other 4 items, which were much easier, say, less thorny from who wanted what, you were able to move towards. So you've built trust. You've made momentum. You've said yes on a few items. Is that when you come back to that other item, chances are it will be easier for you to negotiate it. I mean, if you put it in the parking lot, it's probably a tough, thorny item for the 2 of you. But it will be easier because you already have that momentum and rapport that you've had on the other 4. Now I'm going to give you another example of this. You go in to buy a car. No relation to the parking lot here, just I'm using a salesperson example. Or it could be it could be anybody. But what happens is you walk in and buy a car. What is the first thing that the salesperson says to you? And say, oh, nice day out there, isn't it? And you say, oh yeah, 70 degrees and sunny. Wow, it's just a beautiful day. It's nice to be out and driving around. Oh, I agree with you. I agree with you. Hey, did you see that new building down the street? Boy, they did a beautiful job on that, didn't it? You know, all that glass on the outside stuff. You say, yeah, that really is a really cool looking building. I agree with that. And what they're doing, you're being played. Because what happens is they're building momentum for you to say yes. So then the next thing that they'll say is, hey, did you see the ball game last night? It was great that our team won, you know. I bet that you're a fan of this, I'll just say Red Sox. Forgive me for anyone who's in New York. But are you a Red Sox fan too? Maybe the guy's wearing a Red Sox shirt, and says, yeah, I am. Yeah, I love those Sox. Wasn't it a great game last night? Yeah, it was. Hey, do you think you should go to buy a car today? Yeah, I am. What? So you're building up momentum. But when you're asked all of those, sort of easy throwaway questions by a salesperson or on something you're negotiating, what they're doing is that they're building rapport. They're artificially putting anything, putting the really discussion at hand in the parking lot. They're building up momentum of you saying yes and agreeing with them on something. And then what they're doing is they're pushing you to buy their product. So that's an example of how that's being done. I'm really glad you're on here to see what I just did. What happens is that I have a television remote in my office on my desk. What I did is I just picked up the remote to press the button to advance to the next slide and was wondering why it wasn't happening. Okay, number 4, you want to focus on interests, not positions. Let's go back to the car. I'm going to move to an example that I'm going to be talking about actually in tip 10 also. And what it is let's say that I'm a software developer. I'm going to be developing a new piece of software for the company I work at. Now what happens is that I'm going to go to the data center people, and for those of you on the software side, how many servers do you need to build a new piece of software? Well, the joke answer is, how many you got? Why? Because we want a development server, maybe 2 development servers. We want a test server. When we move it into production, not only do we want a web server, but we want a database server down there. We want equivalent information, equivalent size boxes in the disaster recovery center. By the time we're done, given our druthers as software people, and I'm a software person, so I can say that by background, I'm basically going to the data center for half a dozen boxes. Now, that's my position. I'm going to go and I'm going to talk to the data center and say, hey, my position is I want 6 new servers in order to build this software. Now, is that my interest or is that my position? My position here is that I want 6 servers. My interest is really, hey, I'm going to be building a pretty complex piece of software and I'm going to need a lot of computer power. So by understanding, the person in the data center, by them understanding what my interest is, then what it's doing is he may say, no, I'm not going to give you 6 servers, but I can give you all the computer power you want if you build it, in our remote cloud. So think of that when you're negotiating with people, because what will happen is if you can understand their interest, the reason that they're coming up with those particular positions, then what you can do is you can gain more flexibility and more flexibility in them, because it's really at the end of the day their interests that they want to meet. And it has a better chance of moving toward win-win and the negotiation actually coming to a good outcome. Okay, tip 5. I don't know if you've ever read the book, The Art of War, but if you're not familiar with it, Sun Tzu was a Chinese general like 3,000 years ago. In fact, the book, obviously a very successful general, he wrote the book, but in fact, it was so ahead of its time that it was actually kept secret and confidential by, I don't know which Chinese group he was associated with, but for hundreds and hundreds of years, because the stuff in the book worked. But basically is that what the quote is the general who wins the battle makes many calculations in his temple before the battle is fought. The general who loses makes but few calculations beforehand. In other words, what this is saying is be prepared. Do your planning up front, do your homework. Yeah, it's more work than just walking in. It's the idea, if you're going to buy a car and you're going to be going in and you're not going to be negotiating price, do a little work on the web, checking out to see, what's the actual, list price for the car, compare it, check it between multiple dealers and see what other dealers are offering it for, etc. Do your homework. Look at the features that are behind it so that you're understanding what you're negotiating on. But, and also actually, this slide in particular, tip number 5, what this does is 4 ways to negotiate actually, to prepare will actually be discussed in slides 6, 7, in tips 6, 7, 8, and 9. But the trick is that if you want to negotiate poorly, then just walk in, unprepared and figure in that, you'll just be able to, wing it and do well. Maybe you will, but no matter how well you do, you could have done better if you were prepped. Now, forgive me from going from one general to the other. I tend not to use too many military examples, but just the quotes were too good not to use. And what this one is this is know your objective. And is quoted here, we succeed only as we identify in life or in war or in anything else a single overriding objective and make all other considerations bend to that one objective. I'm going to give you an example of this. Let's say that you're with a software vendor or hardware vendor, someone, who's, a vendor into IT. What happens is let's say, and I'm going to use me as the example. I'll use me as a training firm. Let's say that I really want to get into a pharmaceuticals company. Why? Let me just say that let's just say that I've never had a pharmaceuticals client before. Whether I have or not is another issue, but I'm just using it for an example. I could have picked on any industry. I really want to get in and do my training in pharmaceutical companies. But what happens is like any industry, it's sort of hard to break in. Who else have you worked with in our industry, blah, blah, blah. So what happens is I go to this pharmaceuticals company X, and my primary objective is not profitability. My primary objective is to get the deal. Why? Because I need a reference in that industry in order to sell to the other 50 companies that are in that industry. So as a result, by being prepared and knowing what my objective is make the deal and get the reference. I mean, I can't lose too much money on it, but I'm not going in this, trying to push up the billing rate that I'm going to be charging to them. I'm not going to go in and try in this first deal to really maximize my profitability. My profitability will come later. I want to get a foot in the door in pharmaceuticals. So by knowing that that was my objective, everything else, the price, the dates, the other things that would be associated, with a training or software contract or outsourcing or cloud or whatever it is, doesn't matter. But whatever other, when you know your primary objective, it helps bring your entire plan and strategy on how to negotiate to come into place. One other thing it does, which brings us to tip 7, is it also helps you define your bottom line. So let's say, for example, going back on the prior slide's example, is my primary objective is to just make the deal so I can get a reference. And when talking to that pharmaceutical company, they say, you know what, yeah, we'll let you do training for $5 an hour for us, but you know what, it's our company policy never to give a reference. So you can't have anyone call us, you can't include in any of your marketing materials or whatnot, or even verbally that you do business with us. In fact, I know about actually a financial services firm that does that they'll work with you, but they signed in their contract says you can't refer to them without specific permission in front, as saying that you're a client or that they're a client of yours or anything else. So what happens is my bottom line here is that if they're not going to give me a reference, then then all of a sudden, if that's my primary objective, then it either makes no sense for me to negotiate with them or to say, you know what, if I can't use them as a reference, maybe I'll change my objective to be a high billing rate. And that way at least I'll gain a little knowledge in the industry. I can't say that I work for them, but certainly I'll learn a little bit more about it. But the thing is that knowing my bottom line, if my bottom line is to just make that deal and get that reference, and they say, you know what, we like everything else, we're not giving you the reference. Because I know what my bottom line is, I should walk away. Because why should I take a project that's not profitable, that doesn't meet my primary objective, which was to get the reference, so I should walk on it. Which also with that is, you really need to know when to be able to walk away. Because there's the old adage that in many cases, a bad deal is worse than no deal at all, particularly if it's unprofitable or it has other issues related to it. Also in knowing your bottom line, particularly if you're negotiating for the office, at work, or sometimes actually if you're negotiating with your spouse. But what happens is you have stakeholders. So what happens is that you don't want to be in there negotiating the contract, and at the same time negotiating in your own head. Oh, will my manager like or not like the price for this contract? Oh, gee, that last contract we did. What happens is you'll spend way too many of your mental cycles trying to assess what your stakeholders will or will not accept as their bottom line. So part of the preparation for you in going into a negotiation is if you have stakeholders on, basically a stakeholder would be someone who has some type of, stake, for lack of a better word, but some type of interest in how the negotiation comes out. Talk to them ahead of time. Be prepped to say, hey, you know what, is that I know my boss is only going to let me go up to $10 an hour for these people. By the way, I always use really small numbers in this stuff, but because they're particularly unrealistic. So that it's, oh wow, is that what software development hours cost or whatnot? I make them up. By the way, also I should say, any vendor names that I use, what happens is that there's no agenda there. I'm not trying to push their products or their stocks, but usually it's nicer than saying company X. But anyway, back to the bottom line is you have to know what your bottom line is, and you have to be willing to walk away. Now, the importance of being willing to walk away is that if you walk away, it can also be a negotiation tip or negotiation tool. So you sort of get an extra one. This is the 11th one for free. It's all free. But what happens is that if it's below your bottom line and you know it, and you say, you know what, I'm just going to walk away. You're trying to buy a car. You really want the car, but you know what, you're not going higher than 10 grand, and they're not going lower than 10 grand. So you say, all right, you know what, I've reached my bottom line, I'm done, and you walk out. Now, you have to be willing to walk away if you use this tactic. I mean, you can bluff on it, but if they don't come chasing you down the hall to buy the car, then basically you're done. Because if you go back and you say, well, I don't know, then you've really weakened your negotiating position. But anyway, if you walk away, I mean, can you just picture this? You're at the car deal. You say, yeah, I'll buy that. I want to buy the car. Well, I'm not going to spend that amount of money. That's that's more than I want to spend. And you go walking out to your car. What generally happens is that 2 or 3 of the salesperson, conceptually run out and gang tackle you by the ankles in the parking lot before you get to your car to say, please come back in. I've talked to the manager, and we can get you a special deal because, we really like you and want your business, blah, blah, blah. But by walking away, that can actually loosen the positions of those that you're negotiating with. But you can't do it if you don't know what your bottom line is, because you got to be really sure that you want to walk away in case they don't chase you down the hall. Tip number 8. Rank list your priorities. Now, what this means is that you want to figure out what you want and what you need. If there are 10 items that are being negotiated, then what you want to do is you want to rank order them. And you want to rank order them ahead of time. Now, you put in your must-haves. Your must-haves, basically, if you think about it, tying to the last slide, it's your bottom line. Is you say, hey, if I don't come out of this negotiation with A, B, and C, then I'm not going to sign the deal. It's not worth it for me or whatnot. Also, the reason you want things listed in order ahead of time, literally, if there's 10 things that you're going to be negotiating on, number them 1 to 10 and put them in the order that's most important to you. The reason is because in the heat of the negotiation, what's going to happen is I'll go back to the car example just because everybody knows it. Is that the deal's going to be, hey, we'll either throw in floor mats or a roof rack. And what you don't want to be doing in your head during this negotiation is, oh, floor mats would be really good, but I think I could get cheap ones at Walmart, and blah, blah, blah. Oh, but roof rack would be nice. I've been promising my spouse that one day we'd be get a couple of kayaks, and we'd be able to put them on the roof. And if I get the roof rack now for free, then, I won't be using it at least till next spring. But, you don't want to be going through all that in your head. You don't want to be negotiating in your head during the negotiation, because those are mental cycles that can be spent getting yourself a better deal. So if they ask that question and you say, gee, floor mats are number 7 on my list and a roof rack was number 4 on my list, yeah, I'll take the roof rack. So what happens is that it allows you to be more decisive. It allows you from making, what's that statement? Gee, I don't know, sounded like a good idea at the time. It saves you from that. So rank order them. Draw a line through the middle. If you don't get everything above it, you walk away because that's your must-haves, and everything below it is gravy, and you try to negotiate one off the other to move sort of as far up the list as you can with those items you receive. Number 9, know your potential risks. This is often overlooked in a negotiation. The reason is because, you're trying to sort of get as much as you want and you're willing to give and take a little bit. Maybe sometimes you've converted, you've done a good job converting a, what's it called? I'm going blank on my own word here. Where did it go? Oh, you've done a really good job moving a distributive negotiation to an integrative negotiation. Wow, sorry for that. I had a senior moment here. But what happens is, and I'm going to go back to that example, you're saying, hey, you know what? I got a guy who knows .NET. And rather than either one of us spend, the extra $5,000 for you to bring in a .NET developer, why don't I just let, Joe do the training in your group instead? All right, and then that will save it out, and then you give me the project manager person, all right? And then afterwards I'm thinking, oh, what did I do to myself? Joe, who's my .NET developer, has a major project that's behind schedule due in 4 months. I can't go to the other guy and say, yeah, we'll train you in .NET maybe 6 months from now. So what happens is that's a risk. I've lost a person. If I allow it to happen, then my project is now at peril. For whatever amount of time it takes Joe and my group to be able to prep and provide that training. Or other things is sometimes it's illegal. You're saying, oh, you know what, we'll have all this data. How about we'll lower the price we'll lower the price that we'll charge you and we'll share this data with you because you'll get some value out of that data. And then afterwards you go back, you talk to the attorneys and you say, you can't do that. It's against the law for privacy regulations. So things like that, or unforeseen liabilities or costs. You were trying to calculate in your head what something was. So whatever it may be, is that for this list, if you're coming up with new solutions or with new decisions within that you didn't prepare for ahead of time, then what you want to do is you really need to do your due diligence. Say, you know what, this idea sounds really good to me. Let me go talk to my stakeholders, my manager, my legal department, whoever it may be. But just to make sure that you need to know your risks. Some of them you'll know going in. Like, gee, we're dealing with a company in Europe. Do we want to, you can reduce the monetary risk, assuming you're all in the United States here, if you do it to U.S. dollar pricing instead of euro pricing. Because as the fluctuation between the euro and the dollar changes, your costs will ultimately change. So, I mean, some of that stuff you'll know ahead of time if you're dealing with, in this case, a European vendor. But be very, very careful that when you come up with these new integrative type solutions, that you're not getting yourself in trouble in the long run. Now, Tip number 10, negotiate the problem, not the person. Now for this one, what I'd like to do is I'd like to go back to an earlier example we used. If you remember, that was the software developer, how many servers do you need? Let's go back to that example. Now what happens is I as the software person can go and talk to the data center person, and my bet is we have a lot of people on the line today. I'm betting that at least one of them is going to be laughing when I say this, because they work in a data center and they're in charge of server consolidation. So what happens is that I walk down, talk to I don't know, Susan, working in the data center, and I say, hey Susan, I'm building this new great important project. I need half a dozen servers. And she says to me, no. I'm getting paid. My bonus this year is based on server consolidation. I'll give you a part of one of the servers we already have. Obviously, we're at an impasse. Now, tying it back to interests, if I understand what her interest is that she wants the reduced number of servers, and she understands my interest that I just need a heck of a lot of computer power, all right, then that's one thing for us to be able to do. But the next is for me to say, let's say I want all this computer power. I mean, my position is I want these 6 servers. But I know the truth is, I'll be happy with virtual servers. I don't care. I just need lots of space and lots of speed. Okay? So what I do is I say, hey, Susan, you know what? I say, I know that, I understand that, you're doing server consolidation. And, I got to get this application built. But you know what? You and me are on the same side here. You know why? We're both in IT. So we collectively, you from the hardware side, me from the software side, we have to figure out together how to make the accounting department who we're building this new system for happy. Because you know what? They're in charge of next year's IT budget. So you and me, we got a problem here. We got to figure out how to do this. What have I just done there? What I've done is, instead of making it, I'm sure that, Sue in the data center gets lots of software development people like me walking down the hall, and she says, oh, great, another guy wanting 6 servers, okay? And I'm saying, oh, I know, I'm never going to get what I want. But what I've done is I have converted it from being me against her, person against person, to being me and Susan against the issue of having to make the business client happy. And what that does is that changes the negotiation from being confrontational to being team-based and team-oriented. Because I'm saying, hey, Susan, you and I, we're part of the same team here. We got to figure out how to make them happy or solve this problem or whatever it happens to be. So with that being tip number 10, what I'd like to say is that something very important to remember, and this is key. Now, I'm saying it's an old saying. To be honest, I've seen it in 1,000 places, so I don't really know its origin. But what it is, but it's very, very true, is you don't, when it comes to business, or when it comes to many things in life, is you don't get what you deserve. You get what you negotiate. It could be that next pay, how much you're going to be paid. It could be the price you're getting for your car. It could be any one of a million things. So what I would say to you is negotiate well, or the office shown on the left side of this picture, I guess to the left, on the left side of this picture, that could be your new office if you don't negotiate well. From here, what I'd like to do is, first of all, I would like to thank Alex for his help on this and for New Horizons in general. I would absolutely like to thank everyone who hung on the line with me for the past almost full hour. We truly hope that this has been of value to you. And lastly, what I'd like to do is I'd just like to remind you of our next free webinar, like this one was, with New Horizons on March 5th on maximizing your IT management bench strength. And please look into to our classes. It's funny, they're certification prep, but what you learn from these classes is just an enormous amount of information on how to either move from individual contributor to a management position within IT, or as an IT manager to pick up great tips and tricks, sort of even irregardless of the certification itself. So anyway, from here I would just like to say thank you, wish all well. If you have any questions for me directly or whatnot, I can be reached through to eric.bloom@managermechanics.com. If you'd like to sign up for any of the certifications or are interested in additional classes, please contact your local New Horizons representative.